So hey, I'm Nate Rozier with Invista, and I'm very loud, and I have a microphone, so the people next door is going to hear me, and that's okay. Trevor and I are going to talk to you today about automation. I'm with Invista. I've been with Invista 10 years. I've probably designed a couple hundred buildings, and Trevor's been with Invista 7, 8 years, and he's got about 300 years experience in design of facilities. He's designed a lot more than I have. And we, at Invista, we're sort of a mid-size end-to-end consulting business and supply chain focused on warehousing, automation, systems, transportation, and supply chain strategy. So we're nerds and engineers, basically, if I were to summarize all that. So hey, we're going to talk to you a little bit about automate or not automate. I think most of us know by now that you know the answer to that question, which is you're going to automate someday. Question is when, what's it going to look like, and how's that going to look? And so, one of the things that is interesting is, we go in lots of warehouses. I probably go a couple hundred a year, to be honest with you. And when you take a look at them, most warehouses are still pretty basic. In fact, I still have a number of clients that are using paper. It sounds strange, but if you think about the technology stack that's out there in warehousing, it's not very advanced in general. And yes, there are fully automated warehouses out there. They're not, as a percentage of warehouses, it's relatively small. One of the things you kind of think about is, when you put in automation, remember, every company has a technology stack in them. The warehousing piece is just one piece of it. So I always kind of warn people, I'm like, be careful about putting a racing engine in your beat up 30-year-old minivan, because you're not going to go that much faster, right? You're just going to run off the road. So it's something to kind of keep in mind of how you use automation, how that connects to your technology stack, and how you build a strategy behind that. I wish I was a Beamer instead of a Porsche or that. All right. So automation has got a big opportunity, and most companies kind of see it as a big opportunity. The primary reason is labor costs will continue to rise no matter what. E-commerce volume is here to stay, and it's very expensive. And the other thing to kind of keep in mind is just the raw number of SKUs that companies have is much higher than it was in the past. And that also is not reversing, right? So you're just jamming more and more SKUs at smaller quantities inside of warehouses and stores. And so with high cost of labor, automation is a great solution for almost all those situations. That's one reason why I say you're going to automate something at some point. The question is, how do you fit it in there? How do you make that work, right? So one of the things to kind of keep in mind with automation is, today's automation is actually fairly reliable. It's robust, but also flexible. And it's another thing that's kind of a great way to think about it is you can automate just a portion of the warehouse to add in your capacity, flexibility, or a place where it's hard to hire people, right? You may have areas of picking or put away. It's like it's hard to find talent there. Okay, great. That's a great place to consider automation. There's the ROI we see is usually pretty strong, but the other thing to kind of consider is the cost of space. So we do have a lot of clients where they may have, 3 or 4 warehouses. Maybe they got 12 warehouses, and they maybe only need 3 or 4. And if you automate those, you reduce that variable cost per unit. It helps justify the automation, but also creates a much more efficient supply chain in general, right? It's easier to manage fewer facilities, especially when it's automated. And then I've got less people to hire. I've got fewer recruiting requirements, staff, training. And so there's a lot of opportunities from automation from that perspective. So complexity. One of the things that today's automation is really good for is to manage complexity. So, we do have a lot of clients that are doing multi-channel. They're shipping wholesale, maybe some B2B, and also international shipments, and e-commerce, right? It's a lot of different things that are going on inside of the warehouse. And so it's difficult to configure a warehouse to handle all those pieces without some level of automation. Now, automation is obviously really good for certain components of that. Maybe it's each picking, Maybe it's just storage of low volume SKUs. Maybe it's just handling the product to make sure it gets to the right place at the right time. But when you kind of think about the complexity inside of a warehouse, the more complex you make it, the harder it is to manage that warehouse, right? It's hard to make sure I got the right labor at the right place at the right time. So a key part of the automation story is, okay, what bottlenecks do I have? How do I remove them? But how do I make sure I orchestrate that warehouse better? And that's a key thing that especially that you have when the multi-channel and e-commerce warehouses that are connected to the rest of the warehouse. Like, how do I leverage that labor and get good, consistent throughput? And automation is a great answer for that. So, based on that, there's a lot of opportunities with automation. We've seen, 5 to 10x improvements in productivity in some areas. Storage capacity is a big deal. If I've got a lot of SKUs and I'm trying to store them densely, do I want to add more warehouse space or put in automation? That's a pretty easy ROI on that perspective. On the outbound processing, you can get higher accuracy and you can make it go fast. So one of the things that's great about automated picking and goods-to-person systems is a lot of times I can speed things up or slow it down. I can kind of control the pace of how I flow things through my warehouse. And so if I can speed up the warehouse, I do, my favorite ROI in a warehouse is go home early. A lot of times you say, well, if I can go from, 20 people in this operation to 10, I save 10, that's great. Send the entire warehouse home 2 hours early. That's real ROI, right? That's how just speeding up the entire flow of that warehouse is great. The other thing that's great about today's automation is, and this is something that Trevor's team does a lot, is, you make an investment in a warehouse, it's not a 3-year investment. It's probably a 15, maybe a 20-year investment. So things are going to change through that period of time. And so the automation you want to have should be flexible. I can add modules, capacity, different capabilities. So you want to sort of design that automation so over time I have it. And you can design that. You can design phases today in your warehouse to say, okay, here's where it's going to grow and how it's going to work. And so, again, at some point you're going to want a higher level of automation. When is that? And what's that trigger? And then how do I fit it in the existing operations?
Yeah, thanks, Nate. Nate's touched a little bit on the background around why automation is becoming more and more popular and more common out within the facilities. I want to take just a couple of slides and talk about the different types of technology we see out there, how things are trending, and how we kind of categorize things. As you can see up on the screen here, as all good engineers do, we kind of categorize it into a couple quadrants, and that helps us kind of figure out where to focus these based on the operational requirements of that facility. The first one is really how involved people are with these robotics units. That's really along the kind of the top axis up here, and that's really collaborative. And we're going to show a couple examples of what these kind of look like. And then versus the bottom is really where these bots operate a lot more independently. So that's kind of one axis that we kind of look at when we're looking at automation and where it might apply. The other axis is how is that product being handled? Is that product being brought forward to a person up front where they can remain stationary and support those picks? Or are those bots going out and performing that pick at that point of at the active location? So a couple different axes that we look at here, but reality is this is a very evolving area. Very early in the show, you walk out there and see a lot of the technology, and this is an area that continues to advance quite quickly. As you start drilling down into some of those, you start with the goods-to-person solution here, and really the idea here, and this has been pretty common for some now. I mean, you've got some pretty traditional ones out there, shuttle system type systems where totes are brought forward. That's been out there for quite some time, but we're seeing quite a bit of evolution in this space now as well. You probably remember the days of Kiva. Now we're seeing a lot of different variations on that idea where you're bringing not just a tote forward on conveyance, but potentially a shelving unit forward or a tote forward, or now we're starting to go vertical with the high reach AMRs to try and use that density quite a bit more. But the whole idea here is that keep those associates stationary, remove that non-value added task of travel, put that onto the bots, let those associates stay very focused on the value added tasks. And we're quite honestly seeing rates up here at 600 lines per hour when you have the right type of pick on those particular profiles. The diagram to the left here is an example of that type of shelving unit brought forward here. A lot of times you're pairing that with a put wall where you can do some batching and then distribute that product out across multiple orders. But again, in that particular one, there's a lot of variations now where it's shelving units, totes, and even going quite vertical within the facility these days, which has been a fairly recent update. On the bottom right there, that's probably a more traditional one where you're bringing those product forward with conveyance. A lot of times behind the scenes, or the bots are pulling those totes out of a high density, high vertical storage solution. These tend to go towards more on the very high throughput. So again, if you look at these, the profile of these are really important. What are the characteristics of your storage and throughput needs, and where do these different solutions apply based on their characteristics? The next type is really kind of the flip of that. It's really where the person goes to the goods and the bots are collaboratively helping to support that. We tend to think of this in 3 different buckets here as well. We got the follow me logic. You can see that in the very left. That's really where these bots are traversing through a defined pick path. They know the pick, they're actually tasking that worker. They're actually pacing that worker as well. So a big advantage of some of these is that those workers are not only being paced by that bot, but then they're also being task directed by them so they can be hands-free and really try and drive up that productivity rate. The middle one is really a follow you logic. Don't see this as often, but it is out there where really the workers are now following through that pick path. They are being tasked, and those bots are really essentially taking the work of moving those carts off of those associates, letting them be hands-free, moving through there, and just really focusing on the picking and task at hand. And the third one is really a find me, and it's just a bit of variation where there's usually typically zones within these active pick areas. Associates typically stay fairly steady in that area. Bots come into those areas, they stop, identify the pick, and the associates kind of go up to those. And that's really kind of a zoning where it allows these associates to minimize their travel, but still drive a high level of productivity by following the tasking of these bots that are really identifying where the pick is and bringing the order totes to it.
It does look a little bit like a dating app, though, doesn't it? Follow me, follow you.
It does look a little bit. Yep.
Okay.
In your world, there, Nate. I'll give you that. The robots to goods. This is probably more of an emerging technology. I haven't seen this a ton out there, but it is out there. But I think we're going to see more and more of this. But if you look at this, this is really where you've got different end effectors placed on the AMRs. Those AMRs can then travel around and do a lot of this picking. A little bit more processing power here to know how to manage that within a very random warehouse. If you can look at it too, this is typically going to be applied where the other technologies don't, where it's physically larger items. You can see, for example, case movement on that right-hand picture there. A lot of the earlier ones are, if you can do the earlier ones with small items and bring totes forward with many items, it's going to drive a high level of efficiency. This is starting to expand these bots into spaces that didn't play before, where cubic movement was maybe a hindrance before. These will have the ability to try and play in that space and drive further improvements throughout that facility. And finally, the fourth in this category is really goods to robots. Again, upstream from this, there is some type of pick taking place. It might be something similar to what we've just shown. But in these situations, it's really, these robots are now stationary. There's very strong vision systems, a lot of processing going on, and they serve different purposes. And there's different variations of this as well. The left visual here, for example, is actually a put wall where you've got batch picking upstream, placing that in a sortation. That sorts down into these circular units. Inside these circular units are robots that are able to visually identify the product, pick it up, and place that into that actual final order destination. And that's essentially taking place of the associates doing that through the automated bots movement there. This has been picking up more and more lately as vision systems and processing capabilities have been improved. Same thing on the right, though. You're seeing more and more where we're able to do actually each picking. Even if you get into a mixed carton or things are not situated perfectly, vision systems are now getting to the point where they can actually identify the product, figure out how to pick up that product, place it into the order tote. This is an area that is fairly new, but going to be expanding quite quickly here. This is just a sampling. Obviously, you're going to see a lot more out there on the floor, but this is some examples that we're seeing of where things are and where things are heading. Over to you, Nate.
So if you kind of take a look at the goods to person concept, it's a great way to get very high volume of items to the pickers and out the door, and you can assemble different cartons. You can have them sort of pre-manifested, have the box ready to go, put it straight into the carton, and then ship it out the door. It's very fast free commerce of a certain size. The challenge with goods to person system is you got to think about the type of velocity you have with it. So it's a little bit like a carousel in that you have to load it, right, with inventory. So if we have movers inside the warehouse, we call them AAAs, right, the super fast, high volume ones. Really, it's difficult to kind of feed this machine in there. Sometimes it's better to do that upstream and feed those A's or double A's, maybe it's 20 or 50 SKUs, feed them into a goods to person system, and then have the goods to person system bring in the remainder of the items of the B's and C's, and then it can organize it pretty quick. It's a very small, very limited amount of travel. These are very dense, great for certain size products where I'm trying to put a lot of SKUs in one place. We do design this for clients that have high SKU counts, relatively high volume, and do a mix of maybe wholesale, retail, or e-commerce together, because it's really flexible to go between all those. Okay. There are some weight limitations and some other things, but again, once in its right environment, it's unbeatable. If you kind of take a look at how the profiles inside of your warehouse, you take a look at that chart on the right-hand side, you got a Pareto of items, and that bottom left, right, is the super fast movers, right? And a lot of times you got to be careful with automation because they can bottleneck it, right? Just trying to jam it through. Sometimes you can just even take it offline. Usually only about 20 to 50 SKUs, super high volume. You're going to bring it in and shoot it out. Like I said, a lot of times with the good to person system, maybe you will pick, create the box, put those A's, just have a quick line just to throw those in, and then feed that into goods to person. The goods to person fills in the B and C items, and then maybe the D items. And then you get to the farther upper part of that, maybe those are things you kind of bring forward, right? They're stored way up in I call the dusty area of the warehouse, and they bring them forward and could be introduced at the end of the line. So it's kind of a strategy you can use with it. If you get into down in the C sometimes, when you get into C's, it's usually where you create some bottlenecks, right? I got to go pick a little farther. Maybe it's a higher volume and I have to mix it in with the rest of the order. So that's another good goods to person system. But I will tell you that sometimes we've designed a lot of situations where you actually have a pick mod. You do a combination pick mod, goods to person, and then pick offline, and then merge all those together. That pretty much eliminates bottlenecks based on volume and other things. So that's a great strategy on that side. So this type of analysis is really volume. It could be units, but it also needs to be in cube, right? So make sure you do the cube analysis to help you determine it. If you take a look at when is automation appropriate, we do a lot of supply chain designs and facility designs around there. And one of the things that's important is there's a huge factor in terms of space costs and labor costs. And so if you think about it, the first time you build the DC is the cheapest, almost the cheapest space because you could design it exactly for what you want. And beyond that, your business changed, I got to push a wall or whatever it is. There's a lot that's going on there. It's a lot cheaper a lot of times to put in automation to kind of add that density and capacity. Labor costs obviously are going up around the country, but labor availability is going down a lot faster than the labor costs are going up. So it's kind of an interesting thing to try to find out where can I find people to work in the warehouse? How many can I even get on a continuous basis? And the other thing that's important is what we see trends is turnover. It's a lot of turnover inside of warehouses. So a lot of these automation systems are a lot easier for a new associate to work with than potentially, run around with a gun trying to find out, scan the right item, put it in the right box, some of the more traditional systems that are out there. So all those things really kind of drive good ROI. And again, in my mind, if you're thinking about a new warehouse, you would design automation in there and maybe not do it day one, but within 3 to 5 years, you need to be thinking about, okay, if I put in some automation, what would it look like? And think about it now, right? Some of the other things that are important is really kind of the other factors. So, if you kind of think about it, there's the kind of the scalability. How do I change? I will tell you that, a lot of times you get called into fixed warehouses where, the automation was appropriate for the order profiles they had 10 years ago when they put it in, and now the order profiles change. So you have to think about how much flexibility you're going to have based on maybe changing the order profiles. The other thing that's important is understanding redundancy. Like, what if something breaks? What's going to happen? What's my backup plan? Make sure you kind of have that designed into it. A lot of these have that in mind. And you also got to just think through the overall life cycle cost of any automation that you have. I've seen automation installed 30 years old or longer. That's probably too long. That's when you're going on eBay to find parts, which we also see. You don't want to do that, right? You have to think about, what is my life cycle? How long is it going to last? How am I going to maintain it? Make sure I've got the right staff to hang on to it. Modern systems are a little less maintenance intensive than the past, but you got to make sure that you got a good, robust plan against that. But those are some of the key considerations with it. But, if you're going to an area, you're going to someplace in South Carolina or Southern California or other places like that, at some point you're going to have labor issues and the costs are going to be crazy. Okay, just think about, how do I build this entire cost and automation so at one point, here's what I'm going to do and when I'm going to do it, right?
Good. Well, we thought the best way to show how to apply some of these principles is to walk through a case study that we actually did just a couple years back and show a real-world example. So next few slides are just going to do that, and then Nate's going to close out with how that translates into the financials and then some closing comments here and stuff. A little bit of background about the current state we were dealing with at that point in time. This was a company that had grown through acquisitions at times, and so they were had multiple operating units across different states, creating quite a bit of complexity in how they were trying to manage this overall network of product and locations. These buildings ranged in size from 200,000 square feet to 400,000 square feet. There was a lot of operational complexity in there. Very little processes or systems or operational plans that were common across them. So a lot of complexity in how to manage this overall business. Nate just touched on labor costs, but high direct labor costs and lack of labor availability was creating a lot of challenges within these within these operations. Not only finding the talent, but then also how that was translating into high operational costs ongoing. Systems, 3 different buildings, 3 different systems, creating a lot of, again, not only floor level challenges in terms of managing these processes and operations, but also managing the whole IT infrastructure there as well. So a lot of complexity on the system side, as Nate mentioned, where the system is able to match with the operational plans. There was a lot of traditional picking in here, not only cart picking going through the facilities, that was a fairly low productivity, but there's actually a lot of elevated picking as well within these facilities, all resulting in quite a bit of challenges around productivity and driving up to higher labor content. And there was large item picking as well, and those were actually done in a separate building and had to kind of be brought together at times with small package. So, the current state, what we were dealing with, had a lot of challenges. Not unusual to see this, our organizations grow and evolve over time, but we knew there was a strategic way to bring this together into a much better plan ongoing. I touched on some of these, but just kind of, again, to kind of emphasize some of the operational issues that were being dealt with. I talked about the cart picking driving down the productivity, but there was also elevated picking using order pickers, creating real challenges, not only in productivity, but also in capacity, having the ability to get their product out the door and meet their service level commitments. The higher labor content was translating into higher operational costs. That was clearly on the mind of that management team there. These SKU sets were different across the buildings, and again, trying to manage that not only in those buildings, but from a centralized planning perspective and how to ship stuff where and what inventory management approaches was quite challenging for them. The SKU set was quite extensive. They had over 180,000 unique SKUs, and these things range from very small individual items up to large, non-conveyable, pallet-size particular items. So a lot of complexity in their SKU set, not only with the SKU count, but the physical characteristics of those SKUs.
It's one, you see the couple triggers in here. One is they're picking in the air, right? And if you pick an near narrow aisle, you need to think really hard about automation because it's really slow, right? It's also, there's some safety risks and issues related to that. I mean, I know some companies do it really well. SKU count, picking in the air, narrow aisle. I mean, a lot of like bells should be going off. Okay, I think there's a little automation opportunity here.
Yep. Yeah, and those are things we've seen. I'm sure you see it of maybe your operations, but those are all things that are kind of triggers that there's potentially automation that can help in these areas. Certainly the vertical cube, want to make sure you're using the cube of your facilities well. We saw a lot of open space above operations. We knew that was an opportunity to try and drive improvements in square footage requirements. We talked about the space limitations, not only for cart storage, but for just general flex space as well, especially with the aggressive growth plans that this organization had. Their existing operations wouldn't meet that growth plan, let alone we're driving inefficiencies into their operations. And then we mentioned the outdated technology, 3 different platforms across the 3 different facilities, creating a lot of challenges, process operations, and IT management. So quite a bit of challenges that were taking us down the path that automation had a real high potential within this organization. So we ended up doing a 10-year plan with this organization. We were taking our data out through the year 2034, and I can't emphasize enough, the design requirements are really, really critical to establishing what the future needs are of that facility. You don't want to be just looking at today's operations, but you want to be looking at growth as well as any strategic initiatives that may make the operation look different in the future. But as you can see, the layout drawing here, we landed with about a 500,000 square foot facility. 40-foot clear was pretty common these days, so we took advantage of that full vertical cube within that footprint of space. We did design that for a 10-year plan, taking us out through year 2034. The facility was designed to accommodate all 180,000 SKUs with some SKU growth on top of that as well. When you look at it, a big part of this facility was storage, as a lot of them are, but as we looked at the depth of inventory in those, we evaluated a full range of storage alternatives, but we landed that because of the lack of depth of inventory across these SKU sets, they needed access to the product, they needed selectivity. So we landed at a good combination of single and double deep rack, which helps with storage density, but also is a very cost-effective way of managing that inventory. As we did this, we were also mapping out the different processes that were going to be taking place within that facility, turn that into functional requirements that helped then identify an improved Tier 1 WMS that could meet the needs of that enhanced operation. And then it was really important for this client as well to have branded packaging outbound. So we looked at the outbound flow, looked at different types of packaging technologies, and landed with some automated packaging that could do branding on the outbound side there.
So a couple things to keep in mind that they've got 110,000 SKUs in the automation. They're going to go fast, right? They're going to shoot out very fast. And you still got 70,000 other SKUs, and they got to match up on the dock, right? So when you think about, and a lot of the clients like this, they use a WMS system to kind of help orchestrate that so everything kind of flows consistently. Because you may have people still running up and down aisles picking certain SKUs. Maybe they're oversized, maybe this, it fits that profile. So you just kind of have to think, because otherwise you'll just move the bottleneck. Yep. That's one of the things you have to be careful. Again, my racing engine in a minivan. You got to be careful because how are we going to orchestrate this? And that's one of the things that warehouse management will do. Or order orchestration, right? So those are things that you can do to kind of optimize so the entire warehouse is moving fast, not just speeding up some of it.
Yep, good build, Nate. So just diving one level deeper here, getting kind of into the pick engines and how we applied this particular solution here. We did end up as a main part of the solution, a 3-aisle shuttle solution. Held about 27,000 totes. It was capable of doing about 1,500 presentations per hour. As Nate talked about in his Pareto showed, we were looking at that curve of SKUs and trying to look at the velocity of these SKUs and which solution was best capable of meeting the throughput needs. We landed at the shuttle solution for the highest velocity SKUs to make sure that did not turn into a bottleneck and that could be coordinated with the rest of that SKU set. When you looked at the rest of that SKU set, we then get into this AMR, ASRS, and this was one that is actually evolved now. And it was a vertical reach of a retrieval of a totes, but now these totes actually can go up to 12 meters tall. Very well using the vertical space in that facility. 400 presentations per hour within this particular design, holding 40,000 totes. And this was for the rest of that curve, the B and C SKUs that were physical characteristics for automation. So what we're trying to do is tailor this design based on the SKU sets, their physical characteristics, and the throughput needs, and bring together a blended solution that best meet the needs of this particular client. There were still some what we call desert picks, SKUs that did not fit the criteria for automation. Those were still on the rack, so we still had some cart prep and staging for these desert picks. It was a very small percentage of the volume, but it was something that typically automation can't accommodate every single last SKU, so we did accommodate for that. I touched on the automated systems here for packing, which included a tray and lidding system here that allowed for that automated packaging as well as branding. And then there were a few sortation systems in here. We were using the pivot wheel sorters here for pivoting across the different pick areas, for across the pack out area, and even on the shipping dock. So, but the idea here is to look at your SKU set, take break that down into components, and find those particular components or automation that best meets the needs of that subset of SKUs and apply that. I don't want to spend too much time here because I've touched on a lot of this, but that pick engine number 1, we've touched on these 27,000 totes, about 33% of all outbound units, 1,500 presentations per hour, and we were able to do batch and order level picking, batching by having a put wall adjacent to it to allow to be able to sort that out. The idea behind it is obviously drive storage density by using the full vertical, get very high levels of productivity as well as throughput capacity. Does eliminate all of that walking that we talked about earlier, so allows associates to really focus on value-add activities, gets rid of all the non-value-add activities of the walking. It did allow for sequencing of picks out as well, and there was, if you have priority orders, you can bump those up and get those out quickly. And then there was, you could be batch picking or order picking depending upon the need there. Very common system, as you can see here. I'm sure you've all seen this for many times, but this is still a tried and true type of that's drives a lot of value for the operation. AMR gives a quick visual here again, and this was one of the high reach AMRs, the ones that go high, 12 meters high, extract totes out, bring that forward. Again, 40,000 totes handling for 80,000 SKUs. All of these totes could be subdivided, so we're really using the cube of these solutions well. Idea here is to really, again, is to use that vertical space well, hold multiple SKUs in there. Again, focus this on the B and C items. This drove the price of the overall installed system down based on this here, but it still met the throughput needs and storage requirements, and actually allowed the sequence and the release of the totes out to these upfront pick stations. As you can see, the installed systems here are a bit fewer right now with the one that we went with. There are expanding options and a lot more of these going in, but we saw about 100 worldwide, about 25 here in North America. A lot more volume likely going to be heading this way here, but this is a sweet spot for the slower to mid-level items that drove the cost down but still met the throughput requirements. I'm going to turn it back to you, Nate, and talk through the justification for that.
So when you think about the investment in ROI, one of the things that's important is to kind of consider not just the reduction in labor, but it's a smaller building with lower power energy costs. Everybody forgets parking lot. It's a smaller parking lot, fewer bathrooms. Like, there's a lot involved in sort of overall benefit against it. But you kind of see the $20 million initial investment with the option to go another $10 million for expansion. But it had a very fast ROI. A lot of it was just, you can see there was a lot of FTEs reduced, a lot fewer lift trucks, 44 reduced on that side. Residual processing, so the automation really kind of made things much more accurate for us. And in part of that, it was a lot of, it helped kind of help with the processing because we pre-manifested everything, had it all set up, and reduced a lot of the processing and packaging costs that we had. So that was great. There wasn't a significant impact on the cost of the software. We sunsetted an old package and just used the new WS that came with that connected the automation, as well as the WMS. And they used basically the same maintenance staff. All these automation have a maintenance plan, level 1, level 2, like anything else, and then so we just use the existing staff to connect to that. But they could process 60% more than they could before with 130 people. So it's pretty dramatic improvement with the option to expand in the future. So so you would take that all day long, right? It's a pretty simple ROI on that side. So the thing it's always important is automation is coming. Are you automating? The answer is yes. You are automating. At some point, the cost of automation versus the cost of labor, cost of space, it's going to cross, and you're going to do it. The question is, when are you going to do it, and will you be ready? You don't want to do a big rip and replace. So the best thing to consider is, what is my technology stack? And in my existing facilities or future facilities, how would I build that in, right? And again, most of these are very flexible. You can add modules, sections, shuttles, whatever that is, so you can kind of adjust them over time. So that's really important to kind of do that. And think about my technology stack, what information is coming and going. And if I do add automation, be careful it's not a racing engine in the minivan, right? Like, okay, if I put it in, then how am I going to adjust everything else? The other thing is, from a qualitative standpoint, all of our clients see better order accuracy. They see faster cycle time. So if you think about a lot of the orders, like if I'm trying to do e-commerce and get stuff out same day, if I'm trying to do rapid replenishment to stores, whatever that is, that cycle time inside of the warehouse is an important feature. And so don't forget to measure the improvement in cycle time. It's very important, okay? The other thing I would say is, in your ROI, I would, when I ran warehouses, again, I could reduce headcount here, reduce headcount there. I sent everybody home early, I saved big money, right? That's real money. So how do I drive my throughput to the point where I just have shorter shift, I could cut my shift down or go from 3 shifts to 2 or something like that. Now we're talking real money here. And that also allows me to flex up and down for seasonality, things like that. And the other thing that's important is, talk to a lot of folks, a lot of partners. We're a consulting firm, so obviously we work with a lot of the vendors that you see out there. We kind of see the good, the bad, the ugly. You're going to want to talk to references and kind of go through it. But think about how it comes together. There are a lot of really cool, neat little things. If I add this little thing here, it's going to speed everything up. That's true. But what happens to the rest of the warehouse, and how does that technology stack connect? So kind of think through what those implications are. We have seen some challenges in the past with automation. They were almost always because of that, right? It wasn't thought through with the full technology stack and how it connects. And with that, we'll take any questions. Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts on cloud-hosted WES? What's its viability right now with current AIM-HE that's deployed out in industry?
So, so we do see a lot of cloud-based WES. It depends. So if your automation has a hosted server you got to maintain on-premise, then a lot of times the WS is there also, right? And a lot of the automation does have some on-premise servers that they run. But if I don't have that, a cloud-based WS usually works really well. I think the challenge is going to be the type of automation that you have and how that'll connect. So a lot of times they like to have them on-prem if they have their own sort of servers there that are running the automation. So normally we see it mostly on-premise, but we've seen off-prem WS work just as well. Especially if you have a cloud-based WMS, right? So that's pretty common.
Have you seen any specific limitations with types of equipment that typically latency sensitive, like maybe AGVs, where a cloud-based WES would not work?
No, but we normally all these warehouses have incredible bandwidth built in. They usually have lots of, they don't have latency in general because their WMS is all kind of running real time, in the cloud anyway. So if you have the infrastructure for cloud, you're running everything else on the cloud, yeah. If you don't, probably not.
No, most of what I've seen has been usually on-premise, but I know this is an evolving space there. But yeah, I think for the reason asked.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. was it 18 months? That case was it 18 months?
About.
Yeah, it's about 18 months. So normally what I tell folks is you need to be thinking 2 years because there are places that the permit, we've all experienced supply chain issues, right? So you need to be thinking 2 years. And if you got to do some strategy up front, then you need to extend that. But from the time hey, look, I'm thinking about, a distribution center with automation or existing or new, you need to be thinking about 2 years and give you plenty of time to kind of put that together. Also, if there are any system integration or whatever that is, it gives you time to do that. So, anything else? Okay, well, thanks for coming. Appreciated it, and hope you enjoyed it. And see us over at the Invista booth. It's right over there. It's got a big circular.